Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into something I think a lot of people could use a little help with.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, you know those customer service interviews? Those can be pretty tricky.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're going to try to help people nail them. So we're going to be looking at a guide from the Welcome to English podcast. It's got a ton of advice on how to really stand out. These roles, they're not just about getting any job. It's about being the face of the company, right?
Right, yeah. You're representing them to the customer.
Exactly. Which is a pretty big responsibility when you think about it.
Oh, it is. Big time. And honestly, I think a lot of people going into those interviews don't quite grasp what the role really involves.
Yeah. It's so much more than just answering phones or emails.
Way more. This podcast we're looking at, they really dig into that.
So what does it really involve then?
Well, think of it like this. You're a bridge between the company and the customer.
Of a bridge.
Yeah, and that takes a very unique skill set. Communication, obviously, but also problem solving, empathy, and you've got to have tons of patience.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
You're basically managing emotions, building trust, and you're the one representing the company's values.
All while trying to deliver a great customer experience.
You got it. So the person interviewing you, they're not just looking for someone who can handle the day-to-day tasks.
They want someone who really understands what good customer experience means to the company.
Exactly. Showing them that you get that, that's a huge part of acing the interview.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we show them that we get it?
Well, the Welcome to English podcast, they had this great point about research.
Research. Before you even go into the interview.
Before you even set foot in the room.
I mean, I get that knowing the company really well makes you a stronger candidate, but what about all that time spent on research? Shouldn't we be practicing interview answers and things like that?
Oh, you definitely need to practice. Don't get me wrong. It's all about balance, right?
Yeah.
But think about this. You walk into that interview having already checked out their website, their About Us page, their mission, their values.
Even their history, huh?
Even their history. That kind of preparation, it really shows initiative.
Yeah, I can see that impressing a hiring manager.
Yeah.
But how much further should we go with the research?
I say go all out. Look at customer reviews.
Customer reviews. Interesting.
Yeah, check out what they're saying on the company website. Google reviews, Yelp, social media.
Oh, right. All those places.
What are people loving? What are they complaining about?
I see what you mean. By looking at that, you can almost anticipate what kind of challenges might come up in the job.
You got it. And you can even start thinking about how you'd handle those situations.
Like studying past exam papers before a test.
Yeah.
You've kind of seen it all before.
Now you're talking. Oh, and one more thing. Don't forget the competition.
The competition? Okay.
Yeah. What makes this company different from the others? Why do you want to work for them?
Being able to answer that shows you really did your research.
And that you're genuinely interested.
Right. Okay, so research, it's key. We've got to understand the company's values, their culture, what customers expect, and even know their competition. What's next?
Well, let's talk about the interview itself. This podcast, it highlighted 3 types of questions that they said pop up a lot: behavioral, situational, and skills-based questions. Let's start with behavioral.
Okay. Behavioral questions.
Yeah. These ones, they're all about your past experiences, like how you've handled different situations in your previous jobs.
We had to show them, not just tell them, right? It's not enough to just say, I'm a great communicator. You have to give examples.
Precisely. And the podcast, they recommend using what they call the STAR method.
The STAR method, right.
That's situation, task, action, result.
I think I've heard of that.
Have you?
Yeah, I think so. They actually had a good example in the Welcome to English podcast, too.
Yeah.
It was about dealing with a customer. They were really frustrated. Their order was late.
Oh, right.
And the person being interviewed, they broke it down. They explained what happened, what their role was in fixing it, the steps they took.
And how they turned that frustrated customer into a happy one.
Exactly.
That's a perfect example. It's all about showing how you solve problems, how you stay calm under pressure. That's something the interviewer wants to see.
They want to see you in action, so to speak.
Exactly. And actually, that brings us to the second type of question, situational questions.
Oh, right. Those what would you do if questions. I always find those a bit tricky.
They can be tough. They throw these hypothetical scenarios at you, to see how you think on your feet.
Right.
Like, imagine a customer demands a refund for something that's clearly outside the return policy. What would you do?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Right. It's like they're watching you deal with a difficult customer in real time. What they're really looking for is your critical thinking skills and how you apply the company's policies while still keeping the customer happy.
Got it. So behavioral questions are about past experiences. Situational questions are all about those what-if scenarios. What about skills-based questions? Are those a bit more straightforward?
They can be. Those questions focus on the tools and software you've used in previous jobs. Think like CRM systems, live chat, that kind of thing.
So they're checking how comfortable we are with technology.
Yeah. And your ability to learn new systems.
What if you haven't used a particular software before?
Just be honest. But also emphasize that you're a fast learner. You're eager to learn new things and adapt. Companies value that, especially in customer service.
That's good to know. So we've talked about research, different question types, and having good examples ready. What else should we keep in mind?
Well, the Welcome to English podcast, they also talked about soft skills.
Oh, right. Soft skills. Those are super important in customer service, I guess.
Oh, they're absolutely essential.
But how do you show them off in an interview? It's not like you can just say, hey, I'm really empathetic.
You're right. You can't just say it. You have to show it.
So how do we do that?
Think back to those behavioral questions we talked about. When you're telling those stories about how you handled situations,
Right.
that's where you weave in the soft skills.
Okay, so instead of just saying, I'm a good communicator, I could talk about a time when I really listened to a customer who was upset. I made sure they knew I understood,
Yes.
and then we found a solution together.
Exactly. Or to show your empathy, you could describe a time when you really put yourself in the customer's shoes, to understand their perspective.
And then you use that to solve the problem.
Yes. It's all about painting a picture for them.
Showing, not telling. I like it.
Okay, now let's switch gears a bit. The podcast also talked about leaving a good impression.
Okay, leaving a good impression.
And they said it's really important to ask thoughtful questions at the end of the interview.
Oh, right. I've always heard that. But to be honest, sometimes I just go blank.
It happens.
Do you have any suggestions? Like, what kind of questions should we be asking?
Well, remember, an interview is a two-way street.
It is.
It's not just about them checking you out. It's also about you figuring out if the company's a good fit for you.
That's a good point.
So what's important to you in a job?
Right. Like, what kind of work environment do I want?
The podcast actually gave some good sample questions, like, what does success look like in this role? Or what's the team dynamic like? Even things like, what kind of training do you offer?
Oh, those are good ones.
Asking those kinds of questions shows you're engaged, you're thinking ahead, not just about getting the job.
You're thinking about your future at the company. Makes sense.
Exactly. So insightful questions at the end. Check. What else helps us leave a good impression? Remember, the Welcome to English podcast had one more piece of advice. Follow up with a thank you email.
Oh, yeah, a thank you email. I've heard that before. But honestly, does it really make a difference?
It does. It shows you're professional, you're courteous, and it keeps you fresh in their mind.
Okay, so how should we write it?
Just keep it short and sweet, thank them for their time, and maybe mention one specific thing from the interview that you really liked.
Got it. So a good thank you email is a must. Wow, we've covered a lot. Researching the company, different kinds of questions, telling good stories, asking questions at the end, and a thank you email.
That's a great summary. And remember, even if you've been doing this for a while, preparation is still key.
Like anything in life, right? The more you put in, the more you get out.
Exactly. Now, for those listeners who maybe have some customer service experience under their belts,
Yeah.
I want to talk about a question that often trips people up. Tell me about a time you failed.
Those are tough. No one likes talking about their failures.
I know, right? But those questions are actually a great opportunity to show self-awareness and that you're always learning and growing.
Okay, so how do you answer those questions without, making yourself sound bad?
There's this technique called the fail-forward method. You frame your answer in a way that highlights what you learned from the experience.
Fail forward. Interesting. So you turn it into a positive.
Exactly. Like, let's say they ask you to describe a time you didn't meet a customer's expectations. Instead of just focusing on the negative, you could say something like, in a previous role, I misjudged what a customer needed, and I couldn't give them the solution they were looking for. At the time, I was really disappointed in myself. But looking back, it was a huge learning moment. It taught me how important it is to ask clarifying questions, to really understand the customer's perspective and not make assumptions.
And there.
You could say, since then, I've really focused on communicating better with customers, and it's really helped me meet their needs and even exceed their expectations.
Wow, that's a really good way to turn it around.
Right. It shows growth and development.
I'm going to remember that one. Now, going back to research for a second.
Yeah.
For those more experienced candidates, any specific advice for them?
When you're researching the company, don't just stick to the surface level stuff. Dig
Hmm.
deeper. Look into their financials, their growth plans, recent initiatives.
Oh, I see. It's like the difference between showing up to a meeting with just a notepad and showing up with a full presentation with all the data.
Exactly. You're showing them you're thinking strategically, you see the bigger picture. And speaking of presentations, another tip for experienced folks,
Yeah?
think about your past achievements and how they show transferable skills.
Transferable skills.
Right. So even if you haven't worked in customer service before, you can still use experiences from other jobs to show what you're capable of.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
So, like, if you were a project manager before,
Exactly. That probably involved communication, problem solving, negotiation.
all skills that are useful in customer service.
You got it. It's all about connecting the dots, showing how your different experiences have prepared you.
Right. Even seasoned pros can benefit from practicing,
Mm.
mock interviews and stuff.
Absolutely. Practice makes perfect. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have a question for our listeners, especially those who are a bit further along in their careers. If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice about customer service interviews, what would it be?
That's a great question. Welcome back, everyone. So I hope you had some time to think about that question. What advice would you give your younger self about those customer service interviews?
It's amazing how much we learn along the way, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into acing those customer service interviews,
Right.
let's go over the key takeaways from the Welcome to English podcast and all the stuff we've talked about.
Sounds good.
So first and foremost, research.
Research. You got to understand the company, what they value, who their customers are, even who they're competing with.
It's like showing up to a game, but you've already studied the playbook. You've scouted the other team.
I like that.
You've practiced all the moves.
Perfect analogy. And of course, you have to be ready for those different types of questions.
Right. Behavioral, situational, skills-based.
The STAR method, that situation, task, action, result thing. That's really helpful for those behavioral questions.
Especially if you're new to interviews, it helps you tell a good story about what you've done and how you've handled things.
Exactly. And don't forget those soft skills.
Oh yeah, soft skills are huge.
You got to show them your empathy, your communication, your ability to adapt to different situations.
Weave it all into your answers and how you talk to the interviewer.
Right. And then at the end, make sure you ask some good questions yourself.
Show them you're curious and engaged.
And for those more experienced folks, don't be afraid to ask those tougher questions too, about their financials, their plans for the future.
Exactly. Show them you're thinking big picture.
And no matter how much experience you have, always send that thank you email within 24 hours.
Keeps you top of mind.
It shows you're professional and you really want the job.
So whether you're just starting out in customer service or you've been doing it for years,
Remember, the interview is a two-way street.
it's your chance to see if the company's a good fit for you too.
It's a chance to connect with them, learn more about the role, and maybe start a whole new chapter in your career.
And who knows, maybe you'll be so good at your job, someone will leave you a glowing 5-star review one day.
That's the dream.
That's it for this deep dive into customer service interviews. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive, and we'll see you next time.